The smell never leaves you. That's what I tell people when they ask about Verdun. Not the fear, not the noise, not even the death. The smell. Cordite and rotting flesh and churned earth and gas and human waste all mixed together into something that shouldn't exist in nature. It gets into your clothes, your hair, your lungs. 47 years later, sometimes I catch a whiff of something, turn soil after rain, maybe, and I'm back there. I'm 25 years old again, standing in hell. My name is Lieutenant Samuel Hutchins. I was born in Philadelphia, 1891. Middle-class family. My father was a banker, wanted me to follow him into finance. I had other ideas. Went to West Point instead, graduated in 1913, commissioned as a second lieutenant in the artillery. I thought I was preparing for something noble, something that mattered. When the war broke out in Europe in 1914, I followed it the way everyone did, in newspapers, on maps, thinking about strategy and tactics, like it was some kind of intellectual exercise. The French were holding at the Marne. The Germans were digging in. It all seemed very distant, very theoretical. America stayed neutral. I spent those years at various posts, training gun crews, running drills, playing at being a soldier in a peacetime army. Got married in 1915 to a girl named Elizabeth. We had plans, a house, children, a normal life. Then Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. Then the Zimmermann telegram. By April 1917, we were in it. I shipped out with the American Expeditionary Forces in October 1917, part of the first wave of artillery units. We trained in France for 3 months, learning to use French 75s and 155mm howitzers, getting acclimated to the reality of industrial warfare. The French officers who trained us had a look in their eyes. They'd been at this for 3 years already. They'd seen things we couldn't imagine. One of them, a Captain Moreau, pulled me aside one day. His English was broken, but clear enough. "Verdun," he said, pointing to a map. "You will go there, yes? All Americans go to Verdun now." I nodded. We'd heard about it. The great battle of 1916, the meat grinder, the place where France had bled white, holding back the German assault. "They tell you France won at Verdun," Moreau said. His hand was shaking as he lit a cigarette. "Nobody won at Verdun. Verdun won. You understand? The place itself won." I didn't understand, not then. By February 1918, my battery was assigned to the Verdun sector. We moved up through the rear areas, past hospitals full of broken men, past cemeteries that stretched for acres, past supply dumps and reserve trenches and all the machinery of modern war. The closer we got, the more the landscape changed. Trees became stumps, roads became mud tracks, villages became rubble, and the earth itself became something alien, pockmarked, diseased, like the skin of some enormous corpse. We could hear the guns from 10 miles away, a constant rolling thunder that never stopped, never. Day or night, the guns at Verdun kept firing, had been firing for 2 years straight. My battery consisted of 4 155mm howitzers and about 40 men, good men mostly, kids from farms and cities who joined up thinking they'd be home by Christmas. My first sergeant was a Texan named Briggs, tough as nails, kept the men in line. My gun crews were green but eager. They still had that brightness in their eyes. We relieved a French battery on February 21st, 1918, exactly 2 years to the day after the German assault on Verdun began. The French lieutenant we were replacing looked about 50 years old. Later, I found out he was 27. "Good luck," he said to me in English as his men trudged past, heading for the rear. "You will need more than luck. You will need God. Or maybe you will need God to look away." That night, we settled into our positions. The guns were set up in a shell crater that had been converted into a firing pit. Sandbags, camouflage netting, ammunition stored in dugouts carved into the crater wall. I wrote a letter to Elizabeth, told her I was fine, told her not to worry, told her I'd be home soon. I was lying about all of it. The first German barrage came at 0400 hours on our second day. I was asleep in the dugout, barely asleep really, because you never truly sleep at Verdun, when Sergeant Briggs shook me awake. "Sir, incoming." I heard it before I was fully conscious, that sound. It starts as a whisper, builds to a shriek, and then the world explodes. We'd been shelled during training, but this was different. This wasn't harassment fire or interdiction. This was annihilation. The first shells hit 200 yards to our left, then closer, walking toward us like some invisible giant taking measured steps. I grabbed my helmet and pressed myself against the dugout wall. The earth shook with each impact. Dust and dirt rained down from the ceiling beams. A rat fell onto my shoulder, and I barely noticed. "Counter battery fire," Briggs shouted over the noise. "They've spotted us." Of course they had. You can't hide artillery. Every time we fired, flash and smoke gave away our position. The Germans had observers in balloons, in aircraft, in fortified positions on the high ground. They'd logged our coordinates the moment we'd arrived. Now they were trying to kill us before we could kill them. The barrage lasted 40 minutes, felt like hours. Some shells were high explosive, blowing craters 30 feet across. Others were shrapnel, airbursts that filled the sky with steel fragments. One landed close enough that the blast wave knocked me off my feet inside the dugout. When it finally stopped, my ears were ringing so loud I couldn't hear Briggs yelling at me. I read his lips. "Check the guns." We scrambled out of the dugout into the gray dawn. Smoke everywhere. The acrid stink of TNT. One of our guns had taken a direct hit. The barrel was twisted like a corkscrew, the shield shredded. 3 men from that crew were dead, just gone. Pieces scattered across the crater. Private Morrison, kid from Iowa, 19 years old, was sitting in the mud, staring at his hands. They were covered in blood, but it wasn't his blood. He wasn't wounded. He was in shock. Briggs slapped him hard, and the kid snapped back. "Get to gun 3, Briggs ordered him. "They need a loader." The kid went. You don't think at times like that. You just follow orders because orders are the only thing holding reality together. We had 3 guns left. 3 guns and 37 men instead of 40. I called it into battalion. They didn't sound surprised. They just gave us new fire missions. Target reference 723. German assembly trench. High explosive. Fire for effect. We went to work. Loading, aiming, firing. The 155 millimeter howitzer kicks like a mule when it fires. The recoil drives the whole gun back on its trail. The blast is so loud it feels like your skull is cracking open. After the first few rounds, you can't hear anything except a high-pitched whine. We fired 6 rounds, adjusted, fired 12 more. Somewhere out there, 3 or 4 miles away, German soldiers were dying, being torn apart by steel and high explosive. I didn't think about that. Couldn't think about that. Then the Germans fired back, counter battery again. This time they had our range. A shell landed in the crater 20 feet from gun 2. The explosion picked up 2 men and threw them like rag dolls. One of them was Corporal Hayes, a quiet guy from Vermont who played harmonica at night. He landed in 3 pieces. Another shell. Another. We were bracketed. This is how artillery crews die. Not in glorious last stands, but in steel rain, blown apart while trying to do their jobs. "Cease fire," I shouted. "Take cover." The crews abandoned the guns and scrambled for the dugouts. We packed in like sardines, men breathing hard, eyes wide. The shells kept coming. The whole crater was being systematically destroyed. Briggs was next to me, his face gray with dust. "We can't keep this up, Lieutenant. They're going to kill us all." I knew he was right, But what choice did we have? We were artillery. This was what we did. We sat in one place and fired until the enemy killed us or we ran out of ammunition. There was no retreating, no maneuvering, just endurance. The barrage lasted an hour this time. When it ended, we'd lost another gun. The crater looked like the surface of the moon, overlapping shell holes, craters within craters. One of our ammunition dugouts had taken a hit and was burning, sending up a pillar of black smoke. We had 2 guns left, 29 men, and it was still only February 22nd. We'd been at Verdun for 2 days. By the end of the first week, we weren't soldiers anymore. We were something else, something less than human. You have to understand, Verdun wasn't a battlefield, it was a furnace, a machine that consumed men and spit out corpses. The artillery never stopped, never. If we weren't firing, the Germans were. If they weren't firing, we were. And when both sides fired at once, the noise was so overwhelming it became a physical thing. A pressure against your chest, against your brain. We lived in that crater, ate in it, slept in it, shit in it, died in it. The crater was maybe 50 feet across, 10 feet deep. The walls were a mixture of chalk and clay and things we tried not to think about. Pieces of equipment, pieces of buildings, pieces of men who'd been there before us. When it rained, which it did constantly, the crater became a lake of gray-brown water. We built duckboards to walk on, but they sank after a few days. Men would slip and fall into the mud, and sometimes they'd just stay there for a while, too exhausted to get up. The dugouts were carved into the crater wall, holes, really, reinforced with timber and sandbags. They leaked. They stank. Rats lived in them. Big ones, fat from feeding on the dead. At night, you'd hear them moving around, and sometimes they'd run across your face while you tried to sleep. After a while, you stopped caring. Private Jenkins, kid from Georgia with a thick accent. He broke on the 4th day. Just started screaming and couldn't stop. Screaming about the rats, about the smell, about the noise. Briggs tried to calm him down, but Jenkins pulled his sidearm. For a second, I thought he was going to shoot himself. Instead, he started firing at the rats, emptied his whole magazine into the darkness of the dugout. We had to wrestle the gun away from him. He kept screaming. Finally, Briggs knocked him out. We sent him to the rear on a stretcher. Shell shock, they called it. I never saw him again. The thing about artillery is you can't see what you're doing. Infantry, they see the enemy. They shoot at men. We shot at coordinates, numbers on a map. Fire mission comes in. We load and aim and fire, and somewhere miles away, men die. Or maybe we miss and just blow up more mud. We never knew. But we knew what incoming felt like. Knew it intimately. The Germans had our crater mapped. They'd hit us every few hours like clockwork. You'd hear the distant thump of their guns firing. Then you'd count. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Somewhere around 15, the shells would arrive. You learned to recognize different calibers by sound. The 77 millimeter made a sharp crack. The 150 millimeter made a deeper crump. The big 210 millimeter railway guns made a sound like God tearing the sky in half. We lost men in pieces, not all at once, just steadily, constantly, like water dripping from a faucet. Private O'Brien took shrapnel in the stomach during a barrage on day 5. We carried him to the dugout. He was conscious, trying to hold his intestines in with his hands. The medic, a kid named Patterson, who'd been a pharmacy clerk in civilian life, he did what he could. Morphine, bandages. But O'Brien was going to die, and we all knew it. He lasted 6 hours, crying for his mother the whole time. Corporal Chen, Chinese-American guy from San Francisco, one of the best gun layers I ever saw, he got hit by a shell fragment that took off the top of his skull. Clean, like someone had sliced it with a knife. He was dead before he hit the ground. We wrapped him in a tarp and put him outside the dugout because we didn't have time to bury him. 3 days later, another barrage blew his body apart. After that, there was nothing left to bury. The mail came once a week when the supply runners could make it through. I got a letter from Elizabeth. She was pregnant. Due in September. She'd enclosed a photograph of herself smiling, her hand on her belly. I tried to feel something about it. Tried to imagine being a father. Tried to imagine a world where I wasn't standing in a crater, covered in mud and blood and cordite, listening to men scream. I couldn't. That world didn't exist anymore. Maybe it never had. Sergeant Briggs found me that night, sitting in the dugout, staring at the photograph. "Good news, sir?" he asked. "I'm going to be a father," I said. My voice sounded hollow, empty. Briggs nodded slowly. He understood. He always understood. "You'll make it back," he said. "You'll meet your kid." "Will I?" I looked at him. "Will you?" He didn't answer. We both knew the odds. Artillery crews at Verdun lasted an average of 2 weeks before being wiped out or rotated to the rear. We were on day 7. That night, a gas attack came. Mustard gas. You could smell it, sweet, almost pleasant, like horseradish. Then your eyes started burning. Your throat started closing. We got our masks on just in time, but the gas settled into the crater, pooling in the low spots like invisible death. One man, I don't even remember his name, he'd joined us as a replacement 2 days earlier. His mask was faulty. The seal didn't hold. He breathed in the gas and started drowning in his own fluids, coughing, choking, clawing at his throat. We couldn't help him. Couldn't even touch him without taking off our own masks. We just watched him die. Took him 20 minutes. After that, something in me went numb. Some part of me that had still been holding on to the idea that I was a person, that this meant something, that there was a reason for any of this. That part died in the crater with all the others. I became a machine. Load, aim, fire, take cover, count the dead, write the reports, do it again. Don't think, don't feel. Just survive the next hour, then the next, then the next. Briggs was right. Verdun won. The place itself won. We stayed in that crater for 23 days. 23 days in hell. Most artillery batteries got rotated out after a week, maybe 2. But the spring offensive was heating up. The Germans were pushing hard all along the line. Command needed every gun, every shell, every warm body that could still pull a lanyard. So we stayed, and stayed, and stayed. By day 10, we were down to 1 gun and 18 men. The other gun had taken a direct hit during a barrage. The crew was wiped out instantly, just gone, vaporized, nothing left but a smoking crater and twisted metal. We salvaged what ammunition we could and kept firing. The remaining gun became our entire world. We named her Elizabeth after my wife, though I never told the men why. We cleaned her religiously, checked every mechanism, treated her better than we treated ourselves. Because if that gun went down, we were useless, and useless men got sent to the infantry. Nobody wanted that. The missions kept coming. Fire on German trenches, fire on suspected battery positions, fire on roads, fire on villages, fire on map coordinates that probably had nothing on them but mud and corpses. We fired so much that the barrel started to glow red at night. We had to slow our rate of fire or risk the gun bursting. I lost track of days. They all blurred together. Wake up, fire mission, barrage, fire mission, gas alert, fire mission, barrage, sleep 2 hours, wake up, do it again. The only way I knew time was passing was counting the dead. Private Morrison, the kid from Iowa who'd gone into shock on day 2, he took a bullet through the throat on day 12. Sniper. We didn't even know there were snipers active in our sector until Morrison made a gurgling sound and collapsed. The bullet had come from somewhere in the German lines, fired blind into our crater on the off chance of hitting something. Lucky shot for them. Morrison drowned in his own blood before we could get him to the medic. "Patterson, the medic. He was barely functioning by this point. He'd seen too much, done too much, watched too many men die despite his best efforts. He'd started talking to himself, muttering prayers in Latin, even though I don't think he was Catholic. His hands shook constantly. Briggs held us together. I don't know how. The man was made of iron. He kept the men working, kept them focused, kept them alive through sheer force of will. When someone broke down, Briggs was there. When someone needed food or water or ammunition, Briggs got it. When I couldn't function, and there were days I couldn't, Briggs ran the battery. On day 15, we got replacements. 5 men fresh from training. They showed up at night, led through the communication trenches by a guide who dumped them in our crater and disappeared back into the darkness. They were so young, so clean. Their uniforms were new. Their faces were soft. They looked at the crater, at the mud, at the shell holes, at the bodies we hadn't had time to bury. And you could see the realization hit them. This was real. This was what they'd signed up for. One of them vomited immediately. Another started crying. Briggs got them sorted out, assigned them to the gun crew, showed them what to do. By the next morning, they were veterans. You either adapted fast at Verdun or you died. 2 of them were dead by day 17. One took shrapnel during a barrage. The other stepped on an unexploded shell half buried in the mud. It went off and took his leg at the knee. Patterson tried to save him, but the kid bled out in 10 minutes. I never learned either of their names. The ones who survived stopped looking human. We all did. Faces caked with mud. Uniforms rotting off our bodies. Eyes sunken and hollow. We looked like corpses that hadn't figured out we were dead yet. Food was a joke. Hardtack and canned beef when the supply runners made it through, which wasn't often. We ate whatever we could scavenge. Drank water from shell holes, even though we knew it was contaminated with God knows what. Men got dysentery, got trench foot, got infections from cuts that wouldn't heal in the filthy conditions. Didn't matter. Keep firing. Sleep was worse than being awake. In sleep, your guard came down. The dreams came. I'd dream about Elizabeth, about home, about clean sheets and hot meals and silence. Then I'd wake up to the guns and the screaming and realize the dream was the lie. This was real. This was forever. On day 20, the Germans launched a major attack. Their artillery hammered our sector for 6 straight hours. Not harassment fire, not counter battery. Everything they had. We huddled in the dugout while the world ended above us. The timber beams cracked. The walls started to collapse. We thought we were going to be buried alive. When it finally stopped, we crawled out to find the gun buried under 3 feet of dirt and debris. We dug it out with our hands, working like madmen, because we knew the German infantry would be coming. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, the request came through. Fire on advancing German troops, target reference 815, fire for effect, priority urgent. We got the gun operational and started firing. Load, aim, fire. Load, aim, fire. The barrel was so hot it was warping, but we kept going. Somewhere out there, German soldiers were walking into our shells. I didn't think about them. Couldn't afford to. The attack was repulsed. We'd done our job. That night, Briggs found me sitting by the gun, just staring at nothing. "How much longer?" I asked him. "Sir? How much longer can we do this?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Until we can't, sir. Then someone else takes over." "What if there's nobody left to take over?" He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. Day 23. That's when everything came apart. We were down to the gun and 11 men. 11 out of the original 40. The rest were dead, wounded, or evacuated with shell shock. We'd been promised relief for days, but it kept getting delayed. Always another emergency. Always another attack that needed every available gun. The mission came through at 0300 hours. Standard fire mission, suspected German battery, 8 rounds high explosive, then await adjustment. Routine. We'd done hundreds just like it. Briggs organized the crew. I called out the firing data. The loader, a replacement whose name I'd never learned, rammed the shell home. The gun captain pulled the lanyard. The breech exploded. I don't know what happened. Faulty ammunition, maybe. Metal fatigue from constant firing. Bad luck. Doesn't matter. The gun that we'd kept running for 23 days. The gun we'd named after my wife. The gun that was our entire reason for being in that crater. It tore itself apart. The blast killed 4 men instantly. The loader was gone. Just gone. The gun captain lost both arms. He was screaming, stumbling around, blood spraying everywhere. Patterson tried to help him, but there was nothing to do. The man died while Patterson held him. The rest of us were thrown by the blast. I hit the crater wall hard enough to crack ribs. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't hear anything but ringing. When my vision cleared, I saw what was left of Elizabeth, a twisted mass of steel, the barrel split like a peeled banana, the carriage shattered. We were done. No gun, no purpose, just 7 men sitting in a crater in the middle of hell with no reason to be there anymore. Briggs pulled me to my feet. His face was bleeding from shrapnel cuts. "We need to pull back, sir. Get to the rear. Report what happened." I nodded. Couldn't speak yet. My ears were still ringing. We gathered what we could carry. Rifles, ammunition. The few personal effects that mattered. Patterson was sitting in the mud, rocking back and forth, muttering his Latin prayers. He'd finally broken. 2 of the other men had to help him walk. We left just before dawn, moving through the communication trenches toward the rear. The trenches were half collapsed, filled with water and mud and debris. Bodies floated in the deeper sections, French, German, American, all mixed together. Nobody bothered to retrieve them anymore. Artillery was falling as we moved, random harassment fire. A shell landed close enough to throw mud over us. Another hit further down the trench, collapsing a section. We had to climb over the top, exposing ourselves, scrambling through the broken ground while machine gun fire rattled in the distance. One of our men, I think his name was Williams, he got hit by shrapnel during that scramble. Took it in the back. He fell into a shell hole, and we couldn't get to him. The fire was too heavy. We left him there, screaming for help, and kept moving. I can still hear him sometimes. It took us 6 hours to move 2 miles. By the time we reached the reserve lines, we were shambling wrecks. An officer at the command post took one look at us and called for medics. "Lieutenant Hutchins," he asked, reading my name tag, "you were supposed to be relieved 3 days ago. Where's your battery?" "Dead," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "The gun's destroyed. The men are dead. We're all that's left." He nodded slowly. "Get to the aid station. You're being evacuated." "No," I said. "We need to get back. Need to dash. Lieutenant." He put his hand on my shoulder. "You're done. Your war is over." But he was wrong. My war was just beginning. They sent us to a field hospital. Patterson had a complete breakdown. They had to sedate him and ship him back to the States. 2 other men were wounded badly enough to be evacuated. That left 4 of us, including Briggs. We spent 3 days in the hospital. They cleaned us up, fed us real food, let us sleep in actual beds. It should have felt like paradise. Instead, it felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean, too safe. On the 3rd night, I woke up screaming. The nurses came running, thinking I was wounded, but I wasn't wounded. I was just remembering the crater, the shells, the bodies, the smell, the endless noise. Briggs was in the bed next to mine. He was awake, too. "It doesn't stop, does it?" I said. "Even when we're out of it. It doesn't stop." "No, sir," he said quietly. "It doesn't." They sent us back after a week, not to Verdun, that sector had shifted, but to another position further south, another gun, another crater, another set of coordinates to fire at. We were artillery. This was what we did. But something in me had broken in that crater. That moment when the gun exploded, when I realized we could do everything right and still die for no reason. It shattered whatever was left of the person I'd been. I went through the motions after that, gave orders, filed reports, did my job. But I was empty inside, hollowed out, a shell of a man firing shells at other men. The war ended 8 months later. November 11th, 1918. The guns finally stopped. After 4 years of constant noise, the silence was deafening. I should have been happy, should have been relieved. I felt nothing. I came home to Philadelphia in January 1919. Elizabeth met me at the train station with our son, my son, in her arms, 5 months old. I'd never seen him before. She'd named him Thomas, after my father. She smiled at me, cried, held me. I stood there like a statue, arms at my sides, feeling nothing. This beautiful woman, this perfect child. They should have meant everything, but I couldn't feel it. Couldn't feel anything except the absence where feeling used to be. "Sam," she said, pulling back to look at me. "Sam, are you okay?" I lied and told her I was fine. We went home, the house she'd prepared, the nursery, the life she'd built while I was gone. It was like walking into someone else's story, someone else's life. That first night, I woke up at 0300, the exact time the gun had exploded, screaming about incoming shells. Elizabeth tried to hold me, tried to calm me down, but I pushed her away. Couldn't stand to be touched. Couldn't stand the softness when my body was still braced for steel and high explosive. I tried to explain what it had been like, the crater, the constant shelling, the men I'd watched die. She listened. She tried to understand. But how could she? How could anyone who hadn't been there understand what it was like to live in that industrial abattoir for 23 days? "At least you weren't in the trenches," someone said at a welcome home party my parents threw. "At least you weren't infantry." At least. As if artillery was somehow safer. As if dying from a shell was better than dying from a bullet. As if watching your gun crew get vaporized was less traumatic than fixing bayonets. I stopped trying to explain after that. The nightmares never stopped. Every night, I'm back in the crater. Sometimes I'm loading shells into Elizabeth, the gun, and my hands won't work fast enough. Sometimes the German barrage is coming and I can't find cover. Sometimes I'm watching Morrison drown in his own blood, or O'Brien trying to hold his guts in, or the kid whose name I never learned bleeding out from a missing leg. Sometimes I'm just standing there in the mud, listening to the guns, waiting for the next shell, always waiting. I got a job at a bank, my father's bank, wore a suit, worked with numbers, normal life. Normal people who had no idea what I'd seen, what I'd done, what I'd become. Elizabeth got pregnant again in 1921. Another boy. We named him Robert. I held him and felt nothing. I loved him. I think I loved him. But I couldn't feel it. The numbness wouldn't break. Briggs wrote me letters for a few years. He'd gone back to Texas, was working on his family's ranch. His letters were brief, factual. He never talked about Verdun, neither did I. What was there to say? His last letter came in 1925. His wife had written it. Briggs had shot himself in the barn, left no note, no explanation. But I understood. He'd carried that crater inside him for 7 years. And finally, the weight had become too much. I thought about it sometimes. Joining him would have been easy, quick, final. But I had Elizabeth, had Thomas and Robert, had responsibilities. So I stayed, kept breathing, kept going through the motions. Patterson died in an asylum in 1927, never recovered from what he'd seen, what he'd tried to fix with his shaking hands. The other survivors from our battery, the ones I knew about, they were all broken in different ways. Alcoholism, failed marriages, businesses that collapsed because they couldn't focus, couldn't trust, couldn't function in a world that seemed so frivolous after what we'd been through. You want to know the truth about Verdun? About artillery at Verdun? Here it is. We killed thousands, maybe tens of thousands. We fired hundreds of tons of high explosive at coordinates on a map, and somewhere in the distance, men died screaming. We never saw them, never knew their names. They were just targets, just numbers. And in return, they tried to kill us. Succeeded mostly. 40 men went into that crater. 11 came out. Of those 11, how many really survived? Maybe none. Maybe we all died there and just didn't have the sense to stop walking around. I'm 72 years old now. It's 1963, 45 years since Verdun. Elizabeth passed away last year. Thomas is a lawyer. Robert's a teacher. Good men. Better than their father. They have families. Grandchildren I barely know. They ask me sometimes to talk about the war. Tell stories for their kids. Make it seem like an adventure. I can't do it. Won't do it. Because it wasn't an adventure. It was industrial murder on a scale humanity had never imagined. It was young men fed into a machine that ground them into paste and called it progress. The smell never leaves you. That's what I said at the beginning. But it's not just the smell. It's everything. The sound of distant thunder makes me flinch. Fireworks on the 4th of July send me into panic. The sight of mud, just ordinary mud, brings it all back. Sometimes I wonder about the German artillery crews we were trying to kill. The men on the other end of our shells. Did they survive? Did they go home and find they couldn't feel anything either? Did they wake up screaming at 0300 hours? Did they carry their own craters inside them? I hope they found peace. I hope someone did. They gave me medals, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, citations for valor. They're in a box in the attic. Never wore them, never wanted to. You don't get medals for what we did. You get medals despite it, because some officer somewhere decided that killing from a distance with mathematics and high explosive was somehow heroic. It wasn't. It was just killing, just death, just waste. I'll die soon. Doctor says my heart is giving out. Good. I'm ready. Have been ready since November 11th, 1918, when the guns stopped and I realized I was supposed to go on living. Maybe when I die, I'll finally leave that crater. Finally stop hearing the shells. Finally stop counting the dead. Or maybe I'll just keep falling. Keep waiting for the next barrage. Keep loading shells into a gun that exploded 45 years ago. Either way, it doesn't matter. The boy who went to West Point, who married Elizabeth, who thought war was about honor and duty and protecting civilization, he died at Verdun. What came back was something else. Something that learned to pretend to be human while the crater lived inside him, permanent as bone. Verdun won. The place itself won. It always wins. And we who survived, we're just ghosts who forgot to disappear, still standing in that crater, still firing that gun, still waiting for the shell that finally brings silence. The smell never leaves you. Nothing ever does.